Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I'm Stephen Coster. I'm here with Dan Meter and Renée Sue House from the RCA, and we're going to talk about what CRC leaders should know about the RCA this year. Things have changed. What's an update with the RCA? Last year, we did a video and had Dan wrote a paper on 30 differences between the CRC and the RCA that CRC leaders should know. As an orientation to the RCA for CRC leaders. And this is a bit of a follow-up. It's been almost a year since we did that last conversation. The RCA has had some changes, and we're here to talk about that. Dan, do you want to start with any background to where we're going?
Mostly, we're gonna talk about regional the General Synod meeting and how that went down, and we have I'll introduce Renée in a moment. And we're also going to talk about a change, a sea change that has happened in the RCA in the last 4 years that has been confirmed for me by General Synod staff in person as late as last month. A sea change in how we view diversity and inclusion. And then we're going to talk about we will talk maybe about the possibilities of how churches can come into the RCA. What is that process? Well, what I want to do first is introduce Reverend Dr. Renée Sue House. Renée Sue House is a friend, relative, and colleague. She has recently retired as the pastor of the Old Dutch Reformed Church of Kingston, New York. She was for many years a professor at New Brunswick Seminary. She has been a General Synod professor in the RCA, which is our so-called fourth office. She was dean of the seminary. She received her PhD from Princeton Seminary. She is a product of RCA Church. She's born and raised lifelong RCA, but she went to Christian schools in Hudsonville, Michigan, and at the Unity Christian School System. So she's known lots of CRC people. And
Calvin.
She and as a Calvin alum, received her bachelor's from the University of Arizona in Tucson, and then became a librarian, and but then also a theologian. And Renée is her specialty. I think I can say her specialty is Christian formation of Christians, formation of young people, but also formation of pastors, and formation of consistories and groups in the church, and she's led retreats for my consistory, for example, in Brooklyn. So Renée was a delegate at Synod and has firsthand information for you on the general spirit of the Synod. I'll ask her how she responded to this general spirit of the Synod. What are the high points, a few low points, and what are the big consequences of Synod this past year?
Well, let's talk about the restructuring plan. That seems like it was the big unknown when we talked last time about the RCA is going through this multi-year process, looking at multiple iterations of a plan to restructure. And it's my understanding that that sort of landed this year at the General Synod of the RCA and was approved, at least a form of it. Could you tell us the general features of what that restructuring plan looks like?
In terms of restructuring, the Reformed Church in America has 4 assemblies: consistories, classes, regional synods, and the General Synod. And increasingly, our organizational structures have felt bigger than we can support as our churches have been getting fewer and smaller. And so the kind of key proposal that came to us about restructuring was that we collapse one level, and that would be regional synod and classis level. And most people envisioned that to mean that we would get rid of our regional synods. In the East, the New York Synod, we're more than ready to do that. Our regional synod has been struggling for a long time. There are losses for us in that, but there are also some gains for us. So we would move to have something called a middle assembly. And there's a lot of freedom in how we as classes within our regional synods, who actually have the power to move classes around from one regional synod to another. We, with our regional synods as classes, would be working out specific plans for how we're going to become middle assemblies. That can happen by two classes joining who happen to be in proximity with one another. That could happen by classes who have affinity. That could be theological affinity. That could be a kind of way of understanding the church and its ministry and its practices. So we already have in at least one affinity classes, which is city churches that are joined together with one another. There have been proposals that we would have affinity classes based on language, and also proposals that we would have affinity classes based on theological convictions or interpretations of scripture. So that if you're in a class that is on the whole welcoming and affirming, you could choose to affiliate with a class that on the whole was not. So that is left up to us in the restructuring process.
So do you envision within the RCA this process that there's a lot of reshuffling of congregations from classes to classes? And
we don't envision it. I mean, for us locally, what we envision is joining with at least one other geographically proximate classes, maybe two, so that we could strengthen our ranks and have more human resources and more energy, people with different gifts and skills be coming joined together. I can't speak for other regions of the country how that might look.
What I think is important here is and I have a question for Renee in a moment, but what I think is important here also is that the RCA process is very much directed through the classes themselves. The RCA Synod and General Synod Council have not come up with the grand plan that everyone is now going to follow. This is more typical RCA. We're the larger house. How are you going to live together within this? And we depend on you to work it out. So it will be it's going to be a little bit messy.
Really messy.
I think the RCA is a bit more used to that kind of mess because we're more locally, we have more local, not autonomy, but we have more local discretion and more trust that people are going to make mistakes. People might make an error, but given time, we'll get back. Give it a couple of years, and we'll get back in shape. Instead of preventing any we're not so much about preventing mistakes. We're more about, okay, live through it and see how we can get this to work.
Yeah.
Would you say, Renee, that both at General Synod and in your experience in the current Regional Synod of New York and the classes, the feeling about the restructuring has been generally positive and not fearful? Would you say that it's a positive embracing of it, or is it a fear? Oh, we just have to give in and we hate it. What's the general feeling that you've sensed at your various levels?
Because I was working at the regional synod level to introduce the restructuring proposal and kind of, induce this conversation last fall with groups. And we're a big regional synod. We have New York City, all the boroughs, and we go all the way up to the Hudson Valley. So it's very diverse with rural and urban and racially and ethnically diverse. And there was so much excitement actually among the regional synod folk who gathered that we could actually dream some dreams together and get unstuck from a regional synod that we're committed to and yet isn't working, is demanding our time and energy and isn't working. So we're paying our assessments. We don't feel like we're getting back what we need. Now it's ours, and so we could blame ourselves that we're not getting back what we need, but it also inquires time and energy that people don't have to do local congregation as parish in the East, right? Because we've got this parish model. So it's not just the people who came to church on Sunday, it's all these people in the neighborhood who we're responding to diaconally and spiritually and advocacy-wise. So we're overwrought with too much work and too little time. So people were energized to think we could think creatively. Like one of the ideas was that we could create a school That's as big as our current regional synod. We have a school between the two classes that we intend to think about merging, but we could do some really amazing things in the region, but it wouldn't be a whole structure. So there was a lot of energy and excitement about it.
So you're feeling like this restructuring plan has got traction, that it's likely to be ratified, and
I think
what is the process that it has to go through from the last General Synod?
So currently it would go, all of these things that we voted on will move to our classes, and then classes each get one vote on the proposals, yes or no, one vote each. Under the restructuring, that would change, that the votes that you're given to respond to the General Synod's recommendations would be based on delegations, the size of delegations, which are counted on membership of the classes. So it just gets voted through the classes, and then it goes back to the General Synod. If we all vote in favor of it, then General Synod would vote to ratify or not ratify in 2025. But given the vote counts that happened at General Synod with everybody from across the United States and Canada, it looks like people want this.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, they have to get 2/3 of the classes to ratify it.
Yeah.
That seems very likely.
Yeah.
That seems hugely likely.
But it's kind of creative, regional synod by regional synod, like which pieces dissolve and collapse and get put back together.
Yeah, because I think Albany Synod is of a mind to kind of preserve Albany Synod as a thing and call it Middle Assembly. I don't know how they're going to do it, but whatever, it has to be a Middle Assembly at the end. And they can be as small as 10 churches, but the recommendation has to do with amount of resources, human and financial, in order to be your own classes. And then at this point, because it's still the prerogative of regional synod, the things we are proposing actually have to be vetted and approved by our regional synod. So it's not like we can decide and be done with it at the classical level. Now, one of the questions you post in our email to us is, could CRC classes transfer to RCA classes, or how could that all work? Could it be individuals? Could it be churches? And the interesting thing for us is that once we do away with regional synod, whose job it is now to move classes around or create classes or disband classes, that responsibility now would belong to our general synod to create classes or disband the classes. And so I've been thinking about what could happen. Could the general synod create a classes with no membership and then take all you CRC folk? The preponderance of you all is in Iowa and Michigan, so there's going to be bunches of you, and already the Holland classes is way too big. So at any rate, that is a sort of shakeup that makes questions of how CRC individuals or congregations or classes as a whole might affiliate with the RCA. We would be figuring that out once we.
Right.
Yeah.
I know we have processes now for individual clergy to go from CRC to RCA, and individual congregations to move from their classes in the CRC to a classes in the RCA. There's processes for that exist, but if we end up with a couple dozen congregations out of the CRC that are looking for a new home, we could follow those processes, or is there some opportunity to invent something new or negotiate something? And that would be with the General Synod, you're saying, of the RCA.
That would be with the General Synod.
The General Synod in its history has taken in a whole classes. In 1850, it took in classes Holland, Van Ralte's classes.
Good point.
The General Synod took them as a classes in and assigned them to the Synod of Albany. So it's not without precedent, though the staff right now is not eager to do that. The staff is eager to say in the RCA, classes bring in churches. As recently as 30 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, I forget when it was, Wes Granberg Michelson essentially brought in a whole new classis, the city classis, by bringing in a whole number of PCA pastors and congregations, and found a regional synod that was willing to make a classis for them.
Wow.
It is conceivable, if the will was there, for the general synod after 2025 to do the same, to create a classis and invite a number of congregations in. It would be irregular, and it would also mean that they would go away from their current preference right now, is that this should be a classis matter. I did talk to a stated clerk who talked about the possibility of a number of different stated clerks of classes getting together and in mutual agreement with these RCA classes, bring in groups of CRC churches to their several classes. So you could maybe, for example, conceive of one RCA classis bringing in 15 CRCs, another RCA classis bringing in 13 CRCs, another RCA classis bringing in 15 to something like that, to allow them, the polity is that classes bring in congregations, but we have to honor the experience and the history of these CRC churches. They have to feel on one hand, they have to learn how to feel comfortable in the RCA.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they have to feel like they're not cut adrift or they're not recognized from their own experience. They need to be honored. And as I know from immigrant churches, I've served 3 different immigrant churches. Immigration always takes a long time. It's always a process, and there's always nervousness about it. So, and depends on the leaders. So there, it is up in the air, but there are the staff right now is committed to classes taking in churches, but they can be groups of churches.
All right.
Yeah. But I would say also, we did create something called the city classes, which is an affinity classes.
Right.
And on the whole, though, a lot of us have moved away from the idea of an affinity classes. So I wouldn't prefer, and I can't speak for the whole church, but I wouldn't prefer that the CRC folk would get their own conclaves.
Right.
It doesn't, it's not what we're trying to do, I would say, in terms of inclusion and the work that it takes to become a community, covenanted, doing ministry together. Although you would have to, as Daniel says, submit to the polity of the RCA in that process. But, I appreciate in your paper, Daniel, just the distinction between the structure of the governance and the ethos of groups of people. So one thing to submit to the polity, another thing to bring a whole other kind of ethos. And I think that CRC's ethos has been much more theologically adept and committed and less practical than the RCA has been. We're sort of pragmatic by comparison to CRC Church. I mean, I think it would be such a gift to us to receive people from the CRC who actually are still willing to do theology and have it be a basis for our practice of ministry. So I wouldn't want to see whole classes made up of only CRC congregations. I think that would be a loss for all of us.
Yeah, it would certainly propagate, the social circles that we already have. The distance between them, it doesn't really get them integrated any quicker. I'd say that for sure.
Yeah.
I have a question about clergy, CRC clergy coming into the RCA. So one of the concerns is that the CRC congregations are experiencing right now that feel like they probably have to leave. The process, there's really 2 separate processes for disaffiliating with the CRC. The congregation, has to go through a process notifying classis. They have some congregational votes, and then classis ultimately affirms their decision, acquiesces in their decision to leave, and they declare the congregation no longer part of the CRC. But the clergy have a separate process that the clergy's ordination is tied to the call to that congregation. And so they have to be released from ministry in the CRC or they have to transfer to another denomination before, or they just sort of end up not being clergy at all anymore. If they're not ordained somewhere else and they're no longer ordained in the CRC, they're just sort of released. And now we have a relationship between the CRC and the RCA where clergy can serve each other's churches fairly easily. So I'm hearing from clergy in the CRC who feel like they might not have a long-term relationship to the CRC. Can they transfer their ordination into the RCA and then be called back into their CRC until their church is no longer a CRC and makes another choice, basically? Is that an amenable pathway in your vision? Is that the way you would understand it? Would you advise that that's a good pathway for clergy on the run to follow?
It's a legal pathway. I know it's legal by church order. Is it wise? I have to think about it.
How would a minister transfer their ordination to us if they weren't serving a RCA church?
They come in as a specialized minister. Right now, I know of a classis in the Synod of Albany that is taking in a CRC pastor from Canada as a specialized minister.
And then having them continue to serve where they already are?
No, the person is a chaplain. Yeah.
That's easier.
CRCs have to get used to the idea that classis has enormous discretion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for example, this let's say the CRC refugees started their own independent little temporary denomination.
Yep.
Classis has absolute discretion to welcome they would examine them, whatever, a colloquium doctum, as you guys call it, whatever. And these are very charitable meetings, and absolutely can take in somebody from. They could take in somebody from the AR. The classis has great discretion to take in pastors and congregations as they see fit. Such discretion that the CRC did not like it and therefore left. But yes, classes have that great discretion. The classis has that much discretion that it could certainly consider, without any prejudice or fear, somebody who was from a temporary denomination.
Well, we had talked last year, we said, Dan, your advice was a little bit like, wait and see how this restructuring settles out before you all start jumping into our pool.
Yeah.
You're feeling better about that now. So
I am.
Now that these folks are feeling like, well, I've got to do something with my credentials, would say, yeah, come on over, the water's fine.
Yeah.
Talk to your local council clerk or classes clerk.
I would. Two things have caused this. Nobody expected the CRC Synod of 2024 to come in like the OK Corral. And the second thing is, a lot of the things that I was fearful in the restructuring have been taken out.
Yeah.
So the restructuring is much more conservative, actually, much more stabilizing than I expected. I thought there was going to be in this cross-discipline thing, which is taken out. And the cluster, I mean, it's a very different. The report that Renée saw at this General Synod is light years different from the report that I saw in the Synod of 23. The feedback was so enormous. So
I think, the one thing that we absolutely don't know and can't answer is there may still be regions in which CRC churches would have the option of joining one classis in geographical proximity. There's no guarantee that classis is going to be welcoming and affirming or tolerant of welcoming and affirming congregations. There are still whole classes who hold the same opinion and understanding. So, and I can't say that our classis has a policy of being welcoming and affirming, and Classis New Brunswick has a policy, but I don't know how many classes actually have on record as a policy that we are welcoming and affirming.
Right.
So that's still a huge unknown.
Yep.
There are still congregations who are, the whole inclusion piece, it was inevitable that when we're welcoming race, ethnicity, physical, mental challenges, somebody was going to say, well, what about gay people? What about queer people? But the tenor was that pastors were asking for more time because they're working it through. And our polity allows them to work it through. And they can arrive at a decision to be welcoming, affirming, and it's up to the classes what to do with them in that regard. But there wasn't a sort of animosity or like these people are going to hell, how can you have them in? There was none of that, there's sodomite stuff, which has gone on at our microphones. None of that. The pastors, really wonderful pastors in Zealand who were saying, we're talking about it. And by now, everybody has grandparents, at least grandparents, whose grandkids are gay in Zealand. And so, it's starting to make a difference. But that's still a big unknown. You might, congregation might transfer into a classes or not be allowed to transfer in because it holds a different perspective.
Definitely a conversation to have up front.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think right now we're open enough about it that conversation could be had up front.
Yeah, I think so too. Because that's the tenor of the pastors who
Right.
said, give us more time. Don't push this thing. Give us time. We're working on it. We're talking about it. They don't want to split their churches. Like now the CRC is going to lose churches who don't want to have to be pigeonholed, right? Where they've been able to live with the difference. Now they're going to be forced.
I'm thinking a little bit about the future in terms of trying to imagine what it would be like to have, Dan, you had said there's been a lot of change in the RCA in the last 5 years. And we touched on it briefly, but I still am interested in this topic of sort of the bringing a lot of CRC folk into the RCA, a lot of CRC folk with this deeply Kuyperian background. A lot of them are denominational leaders. They're used to running the agencies of the CRC. A lot of, high octane CRC folks, professors and whatnot. Is there a culture clash there? Is that, do you see that as an opportunity for conflict or growth or both, or just wondering what that mix would be like? Because I don't know that a lot of the CRC folks are familiar enough with the RCA to have a clear vision of what it would be like to sort of pour ourselves into the, mixing 2 buckets of paint. What color will it be when you get done? I don't know.
I can see potential for dissonance, certainly. If one of the big differences is we have CRCs that have to get used to loyal. The RCA is loyal to a very firm constitutional structure with a lot of rooms and movement inside that. We trust our structure to give us a lot of room and play. And I want to go in this room now, and I want to go in that room, and so on. And these people are in that room, but we all accept it, inhabit this reformed structure. And I think for a lot of people, there's a way in which the RCA, for many people, the polity is one of the most important expressions of being reformed. That is an approach to power and responsibility.
Yeah.
So if people from the CRC can live with people strongly disagreeing with them in their own room and saying, if people from the CRC are willing to hear people Kuyper being called as a apartheid-loving racist, if they can tolerate that,
2 things could be true.
Right? Yeah, I think it's a matter of whether CRCs can live with room for all or all one body? If I wrote this in an article recently that the CRC, the names of our LGBTQ acceptance organizations perfectly typify our two denominations. The RCAs is room for all, and the CRCs is all one body. And the CRC has always wanted to be all one body. We share the same theology, and the experience at First Christian Reformed Church, Paterson, New Jersey, is the same as First Christian Reformed Church, Grand Rapids, is the same as First Christian Reformed Church, Englewood, Illinois, as First Los Angeles, right? So, and a minister could move all one body. The RCA has been this from the beginning, public church with room for all. And that's how come it was able to find a place for virality, because he was willing to accept the room for all as long as the structure was sound. If the CRCs can learn the disempowerment in a way of sharing a building with people who don't understand you or you don't understand, and you're going to live together and eat together, that's going to be the trick, I think. Yeah, there will be some loss of power. There's no question about it. People who have power, I've often seen this with immigrant congregations, that people who had power in the home country don't have power in the new one. And that often causes trouble in congregations because they're trying to find that they don't speak English well enough or whatever. The loss of power in immigration has to be understood and dealt with by both by the receivers as well. But there's going to be pain and loss and hurt in it, and also disempowerment. Can't help it. And right now, the RCA is in a much happier place as a whole. Renee, I think you might agree with me that on the whole, right now, the RCA is feeling generally more positive than it has felt in years. Would you say?
Joyful, even.
Joyful, even.
Say.
Yeah. So we're in a better position, I think, right now. And I want to pull out one thing from a couple things. Steve, I'm going to ask you to post a link online to the paper update, RCA update. Yep. Also, I'd like you to post the email addresses of two persons from RCA staff. Christina Davilar is the Chief of Operations of the General Synod staff. Laura Osborne is in charge of interreligious and ecumenical affairs. And they are going to be they have the green light. That's the term that Christina Davilar told me. They have the green light to assist CRCs with information and guidance on needing to transfer in. A year ago, our General Secretary was hesitant about, but as of this past year, the General Secretary has given the green light to staff to be assisting to CRC congregations wanting to come in. And that has to do with the fact that since what this General Synod confirmed has been now the recognition in print in General Synod reports, something we've already known, but has been recognized by the General Synod Council in print and in its report on restructuring. That is, in the RCA, questions of who may be a member of a church and who may be married have always been the prerogative of consistory, not of General Synod. Who may be ordained and whom their congregations may marry is the prerogative of classes, not of General Synod. That has always been the case. That's how come Brooklyn and Middle Collegiate and other churches were able to operate the way they did. It's been recognized by the General Synod. It is now assumed as part of the restructuring that the denomination now, as a whole, holds to the same position that Classis North Grand Rapids and city classes have put in paper, that both views, the traditional view and the open and affirming view, are to be honored in the church and respected. and neither one they're honored and respected. And individual classes will be respected for their choices, and consistories accountable to those classes for their choices. That is now the position that the RCA has taken. So the General Synod paper from 1978 and subsequent papers, they represent probably the majority traditional opinion of the Holy Church Catholic throughout the world. They're going to probably stay up there because they represent the majority church, throughout the world. But the point of view is that in the RCA, it's recognized now. It's in print several times since 2021. It's the prerogative of classes and consistories to determine who gets ordained, who gets married, and who are members. Nobody will interfere with that.
So tell me more about the other part that came out of the General Synod, the diversity and inclusion.
It was pretty astounding, and I realized that I didn't include in my report, and therefore it's not in the report that Daniel has included in his paper, that the initiatives to change church order, our constitution, therefore, which we do submit to, although there are no police to make sure that you do it, those proposals to change church order, to use this much more evidently inclusive language and being able to name people groups explicitly, came out of our African American Black Council, which is a very strong force for us since 1965. And we also have a commission on race and ethnicity. So both of these groups were bringing independent proposals. I'm sure they were consulting about them, but there was just a lot of input, proactive input coming to this General Synod from the councils and the commission. And also, I think, because I was at New Brunswick for years, and starting in the late 1970s, we began to offer evening theological education in a 5-year format. And we began to have, within a 15-year period, a preponderance of African American students at New Brunswick Seminary, not necessarily RCA. And our faculty grew in terms of race and ethnicity to be much more diverse. And at this year's synod, all of these New Brunswick Theological Seminary graduates who came to us as AME Zion, AME, Progressive Baptist, National Baptist, Pentecostals, whatever, found a home in the RCA, which they loved because they've come from these kind of free and independent churches, some of them, and they see how that sort of polity doesn't work or becomes cults of personality. Oh my goodness, it made me weep actually to see all of these students from the seminary, African American and also Hispanic students, brilliant and articulate about racism and racial inclusion and why changing structures and constitution and church order and Belhar Confession has given energy to that. They can cite the Belhar now as one of our standards, and it just seemed to coalesce this year in a really powerful way in terms of kind of leadership of commissions and agencies and staffing of the RCA, like a genuinely really diverse and young, many younger people. So that piece is incredibly strong. The other thing I was thinking about in this regard, you guys have professors of theology who have a quite limited charge compared to professors of theology in the RCA. So not only are we charged for the formation of students and the oversight of their preparation, issuing these things we used to call certificates of fitness for ministry or professorial certificates. And also your guys, I don't know if they're all guys, actually, these professors of theology, your folk also are to defend against heresies, while our professors of theology have long been understood to have also the prerogative to lead the church in its biblical and theological thinking. So at New Brunswick, the professors who were hired to teach theology were professors of systematic and constructive theology. So there's a certain authority in that office that not all people like or submit to, but I think it's made a difference for us as the faculties have been able to do progressive theological thinking, constructive theological thinking, while conserving traditions, reformed traditions and commitments through our commissions, which actually are pretty powerful in the RCA and totally volunteer.
Synod commission. Just quickly say what a commission is.
On theology, social action, history, ethnicity, race, women,
Ecumenism.
ecumenism.
These are standing committees of the Synod that are volunteer and have been staffed and will continue. And they are standing committees that members sit on for like 6 years, two terms, and they have a lot of say. They are expected to put business on the floor of Synod every year.
Huh?
Which is huge. It moves the synods to have this, and we do our best to make these commissions diverse in their membership. And often, though, they must include professors of theology. And we were responding to the work of Synod that was coming up and prepared to speak to it on the floor of Synod as delegates every year. There were 2 professors of theology. So I think that has formed us, and it's really been an important part of how we work.
So you're asking the professors and these commissions to put things on the agenda of your synod on here's things you should be thinking about.
Yeah.
For the future of our ministry together.
Yeah.
Coming out of constructive theology.
Yeah. Awesome. So after the 1978 and 79 papers, which took the stance that on the one hand, sexual orientation is not a chosen reality, they made the unfortunate comparison to that it's like being born with some sort of handicap that you didn't choose. And it's unfortunate, but the point was to say it's not a chosen thing. Like people don't wake up and think, oh no, I think I'll be gay. So it's like being heterosexual. You are what you are. That on the one hand, but on the other hand, also calling for much better pastoral care of persons who are gay and lesbian, but also saying that such persons should be celibate. But what happened in subsequent years is that commissions could continue that conversation through the stuff that they were saying to the Synod and help develop resources so that we kept having the conversation a variety of ways. I think not terribly effective, but it could continue to come before the Synod because the commissions were working, and then of course also overtures coming from classes to the Synod to keep it before us. I think those 2 pieces, professors of theology and commissions, have helped us stay more theologically agile and open in our diversity.
Whether the CRCs come into the RCA, that's going to be Renee and I think speak for a lot of people who think that for the RCA to be a wonderful thing, and we think it might be very good for you, and it might be healing of Renee's family has family stories of Renee's father could not stand up at her sister's baptism at first CRC because he was RCA, that kind of thing. Wow. So we all have those stories, but the reconciliation is Belhar calls us for unity, reconciliation, and justice. And the RCA is really guided by Belhar in this right now, that we are trying to seek Visible unity, not for the sake of our denomination, but for the sake of the credibility of the church as a whole, that people might believe. That's
Yeah.
our language, that people might believe. So unity, reconciliation, and but the justice thing is also important for us. And we believe, from what we know of CRCs, that there's a lot of passion for justice right now. That it's deep, and it's not just the injustice of Synod 2024, but what the Christian church's mission in the world is. And if that's from a Kuyperian point of view, even a progressive Kuyperian point of view, we get that public justice. So for us, I think for a number of us, it's not just Renee and myself want this for the RCA, we want this for the church.
Yeah.
And we think we need to encourage this for the sake of the Church of Christ. And if the CRCs find out that it doesn't work for them, well, then we bless you. And how can we still help you in terms of unity, reconciliation, and justice?
Yeah.
If you find out that you don't like our building, our Constitution, hey, you know what? How can we still be Catholic with you?
Yeah.
That's our invitation is genuine and it's without force.
Dan and Renee, I just want to thank you for spending this time together. This has been very helpful.